Soldiers fought and battles won for peace on earth until the fighting's done. They left their homes and said goodbye to fight a war with loved ones left to cry. We remember when we love, when we give. We remember when we stop and forgive. We remember so many lives they never lived. We remember. We bow our heads and close our eyes to honor those who freely gave their lives. Bring them home, keep them safe. Freedom's ours because they were so brave. We remember when we love, when we give. We remember when we stop and forgive. We remember so many lives they never lived. Let their stories change your heart. We remember when we love, when we give. We remember when we stop and forgive. We remember so many lives they never lived. We remember. Soldiers fought and battles won for peace on earth. Oh, let the fight be done. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all us command. With glowing hearts we seek your rights, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Welcome to Bond Academy's Virtual Remembrance Day Assembly. The sounds of war you just heard at the beginning of our presentation were the actual final sounds of the First World War as the guns went silent when the war was over at 11 a.m. November 11th, 1918. Those who were in the war decided it would be right to remember their friends on the day that the fighting stopped. Many Canadians also died in the Second World War, the Korean War, on peacekeeping missions, and in more modern conflicts, including Afghanistan. These men and women are also remembered on November 11th. When you wear a poppy, you remember all those brave Canadians. Just remember that these brave Canadians, after months or years away, they return home, some finding everything has changed, including themselves. They feel left out, abandoned, cheated, and alone. Others quietly fade into mainstream society. They walk among us as seniors, grandparents, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, neighbors, family, colleagues, and friends. These men and women lost their innocence in life to the terrible realities of the world, through wars, peacekeeping, and through civil assistance. Their sacrifice and names are too soon forgotten. As innocent teenagers, no one started out wanting to be a hero. They each have their own reasons for joining up. Little did they realize that their efforts would build and strengthen our nation. Today, our serving soldiers are a little older than the teens of World War II. Many have post-secondary education and a greater appreciation for our country and world affairs. All understand that the price of freedom was paid by the blood, sweat, and tears of our veterans. They too are willing to serve their country to defend the rights and freedoms won so long ago, with the full understanding that the cost of each sacrifice could be their lives. I am extremely proud of our serving men and women and strongly stand behind them in support. No matter where you come from, the color of your skin, the language you speak, the types of clothes you wear, or your religious faith, you now call Canada home. And as everyone else in Canada, we are all immigrants from one generation or another. We wear a poppy because we believe in the freedom Canada symbolizes and understand the sacrifices made in the past so we can be free today. Our country that has sent so many young men and women into harm's way to protect our freedom and the freedoms and lives of others who cannot fight for themselves. Many have not returned home from helping bring safety and stability to people they do not know. They unselfishly put their lives in danger to protect the innocence of others. Do not judge them, as they have not and will not judge you. Show your respect for what they have done and continue to do by wearing a poppy as they stand for Canada. They stand for all of us, as Canada is our home. The greatest thing you can do is thank a veteran. By a fist bump, hug, or simple wave, and saying thank you. Remember when you see a veteran this Remembrance Day, don't forget to thank them for helping to make Canada a great country. Over the next 40 minutes, you will hear songs, stories from many different people, all in the theme of remembrance. Take all this time to remember all who have helped build this great country.
appointed to recognize the sacrifices of Canadians in the World Wars, the Korean War, and other conflicts, including Afghanistan. We refer to those soldiers as veterans. That is why we are gathered here today, to say thank you to the soldiers and to their families who went to fight or are still fighting for the freedoms and the rights of others. The ceremony today is for the many men and women and their families who sacrificed and lost so much during these wars. What we hope to accomplish today is to provide you with a greater understanding of the reason for Remembrance Day and to develop an appreciation for the sacrifices that were made to fight and maintain the freedoms that we take for granted in Canada. War is horrific, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And in war we have victims in addition to the soldiers and their families. Many of the veterans today are not all elderly, but young men and women. Many are still in their 20s and 30s and still serving, in many cases suffering. We have learned that for many returning from a war or an armed conflict, that is not only those that were physically injured that suffer. In many cases, it is the psychological and emotional damage that can inflict the greatest suffering. There is the loss as well to families whose family members did not return home from the war or return home changed forever. Many of the men and women in the world wars who went to war were very young when they left their homes for many years. Some were away as many as 6 years. Many of those soldiers who went to war in World War and their families believed that the war would be short and that they would be home by Christmas. As it turned out, it was 5 or 6 Christmases before they returned. In our school, we have secondary students, and you go to high school for 4 years. Think about how much time that is. Many younger than our oldest students were fighting and away from home for longer than it will take for you to get out of secondary school. Not every country is as fortunate as Canada. We have many freedoms or rights that some countries can only dream about. These freedoms are here because of the willingness of hundreds of thousands of men and women who were and are willing to risk their lives to preserve these freedoms. What can you do to show your appreciation? Attend Remembrance Day ceremonies like this one. Wear a poppy, the symbol of Remembrance Day. Make a donation to the Legion. The basic purpose of poppy funds is to provide immediate assistance to ex-servicemen and servicewomen in need. Show respect during the Remembrance Day ceremonies. On Remembrance Day, stop whatever you are doing at 11 a.m., like today, for a moment of silence and reflection. If you ever meet a veteran, thank them for their sacrifices. Appreciate your freedoms. They are not guaranteed. They are not a right, but a privilege, and privileges can be lost.
Le souvenir est fondamental pour définir d'où je viens, qui je suis et où je m'en vais.
I respect Remembrance Day.
Because it's such an important date and such an important time.
C'est important de se souvenir.
Not just one single day, November 11.
Le 11 du 11e mois à 11 heures.
I think it's more than just saying thank you for your service.
It's also about the human side and not just the faceless soldier side.
Remembrance Day, I just think about
Passchendaele,
Omaha Beach,
Juno Beach.
Ce qu'on a fait pour les autres pays.
400,000 people took part in D-Day.
La guerre de Corée.
Hill 187.
Stabilization in Congo.
Qu'est-ce qui est arrivé en Haïti?
The children of Afghanistan.
The genocide that lasted 100 days.
For me, it's to remember the fallen.
Toutes les camarades avec qui j'ai combattu.
I remember my husband, Corporal Bryce Keller.
J'ai le capitaine Nicolas Godard dans mon cœur.
Jean-Guy, mon ami.
Caporal-chef Byron Gruff.
The families and the civilians and the people who have to deal with war in the places we've been.
I remember World War I veterans when I was growing up.
I remember Chinese Canadian in World War II.
Ces gens-là ont fait des choses qui sont extraordinaires.
They're the heroes. They gave their life.
La raison pourquoi je suis ici, la raison pourquoi je porte cet uniforme, vient de ce qui a été fait par mes prédécesseurs.
We have what we have in Canada today is thanks to our forefathers who have gone before us.
I'm not a hero, I'm a survivor.
Pour ces gens-là, ça vaut la peine de se souvenir puis de montrer du respect envers eux.
Le souvenir continue de me propulser, de me motiver et de me convaincre d'accomplir la mission qui m'est assignée.
Flanders Fields by John McCraig.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow. Between the crosses row on row, a marker placed in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. Scares heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt bonds, our sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you for failing hands we throw. The torch be us to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep till poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Second Lieutenant Christian Bagoria. I'm a signal officer with the Canadian Armed Forces in the 31st Signal Regiment with the Canadian Army. As a signal officer, I'm responsible for managing communication capabilities and personnel who maintain and operate those capabilities. For example, we're responsible for supporting computer-based information systems that assist with battlefield command and control, the full spectrum of radio systems from short range to satellite, electronic warfare capabilities, networking, among other communication systems. I'm honored to join you today to remember the sailors, soldiers, aviators, and Special Forces members who came before me. Every Veterans Week, we pause to reflect on the service and sacrifices of Canada's military members. We think of their courage, their bravery, and their selflessness in defending Canada and the values we hold dear. Canada's military history is one of exceptional valor and sacrifice. When I think of these values, I think of the people who served at Beaumont Hamel on the first day of the Battle of the Somme during the First World War. In July 1916, 800 members of the Newfoundland Regiment courageously joined the fight on the front lines against enemy forces in France. They suffered catastrophic losses as they advanced on the German lines. After a hard night of fighting, only 68 men answered their morning roll call. 300 soldiers had paid their ultimate sacrifice, and hundreds more had been seriously injured. In just one night, a generation of Newfoundlanders was completely devastated. The young men and hundreds of thousands of others from Canada left the safety and security of their own homes to protect, serve, and defend our country, our allies, and our values. Many would never come home. As we reflect on the service and sacrifices of those who came before, we must also recognize that not everyone was able to serve equally. Many Black Canadians faced discrimination and prejudice while trying to enlist in the First World War. They were told it was a white man's war and because of that, they were denied their right to serve. But these brave and determined individuals fought for 2 years against this injustice. And finally, on July 5th, 1916, the number 2 Construction Battalion came together. They were Canada's first and only black battalion, charged with building and preserving roads and railways, transporting lumber, and maintaining water and electrical supplies. Their efforts were crucial to the war effort, but when they returned home, they were not recognized for their wartime contributions as they deserved. As we think about everyone who has served our country and fought for our freedom, it's important that we think about the uncomfortable parts of our history. We must keep striving to do better, fighting for peace, freedom, and equality across the globe, and here at home too. Just 21 years after the First World War ended, Canadian Armed Forces members were back on the front lines. Over 1 million Canadians and Newfoundlanders served during the Second World War on land, at sea, or in the air. Paul Bender, a member of the Merchant Navy, is one of these many Canadians who fought at sea. While on a convoy in 1944, Paul and his crew of 104 picked up 84 survivors from a sunken ship that had been torpedoed in the middle of the sea. He and his crew put their own lives at risk to rescue their fellow Canadians in need. Their bravery in the face of serious danger is just one of many stories that tell us about our country and about the people who served. Canada's military history didn't stop after 1945. Canadian Armed Forces members have made incredible contributions in Korea, in the Middle East, and more recently in Afghanistan. I and others like me are inspired by their stories and sacrifice. We are inspired by people like the 700 Canadians who helped fight off 5,000 enemy soldiers during the Battle of Gyeong, one of our most important battles during the Korean War. We're inspired by people like Major Lin Doucet, an air weapons controller who helped secure the skies during the Gulf War, while also fighting sexism at the base where she was stationed. And we're inspired by Captain Nicolas Godard, who gave her life trying to secure peace and freedom for the people of Afghanistan. Although Canada is not currently fighting in any combat missions, we carry on the important legacy of those who came before. Right now, Canadian Armed Forces members are working on the ground, in the air, and at sea to protect and defend our country and to support our allies across the globe. Our missions in Europe, the Middle East, Asia Pacific are all about supporting our international allies and partners. We take a lot of pride in being a reliable friend and in working together at sea, on land, and in the air. We contribute to NATO assurance and deterrence measures because we are all safer when we work together. And in countries like Ukraine, Iraq, and Lebanon, we support local security forces. We help them develop the skills they need to build and maintain long-term peace and stability. We also have people doing important work to support United Nations peacekeeping operations that include flying personnel, equipment, and supplies where they are needed for UN operations. Here at home, we are honored to help out in communities big and small across the country. Whether it is a natural disaster, a global pandemic, or a threat to our Arctic, as members of the Canadian Armed Forces, we are ready to answer the call. We have battled floods, hurricanes, and forest fires. When Canadians are in distress, they can count on us to get them to safety. And when COVID-19 hit, we were called upon to help. Canadian Armed Forces members work in long-term care facilities, clinics, and warehouses. We help to stop the spread of the virus in remote and indigenous communities across the country, and we help roll out the vaccine. I hope you will all take the time to reflect on the efforts of our Canadian Armed Forces members, both past and present. Not just today, but every single day. Never forget the sacrifices in the name of peace and freedom. Sacrifices that made Canada the country it is today. And remember that today there are thousands of members who put their lives on the lines in defense of our country, our people, and our values. Lest we forget. Thank you.
Canada's military history is more than just dates and battles. Our history is people. For more than 100 years, Canada's sailors, soldiers, aviators, and special forces have risked their lives for one common goal: building a better world. Some have served overseas, protecting our allies and upholding the rights and freedoms of others. Some have helped out in their communities in times of need, after fires, floods, or throughout the pandemic. Each one has a unique story.
Veterans Week is a time to remember their service and their sacrifice. A time to remember their selflessness and their unwavering belief in democracy and peace. I'm so honored to share some of their stories with you today. Stories that inspire me to be a better member of the military, a better Canadian, and a better person.
I want you to imagine this. It's 1916. You're a young person full of energy. You've left your family back home in Newfoundland and are now in France, near the village of Beaumont-Hamel. You're ready to fight to bring peace and safety back to Europe. It's July 1st, and you and 800 of your comrades in arms advance towards the front line. You continue to fight as those beside you fall. You keep pressing forward long into the night. The next morning, only you and 67 others from your regiment answer the roll call. 700 brave troops are not with you that morning. Some are missing, some are wounded, and some will never answer the call again. That is the terrible cost of war. Over 62,000 Canadians died in the First World War, including roughly 1,300 soldiers from the Dominion of Newfoundland, who proudly served in their regiment as Newfoundland was not yet a Canadian province.
We remember their incredible sacrifices and the sacrifices of those who were injured or struggled with their mental health when they came home. But we must also recognize that not everyone was allowed to serve equally, like the members of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. In the early years of the First World War, many Black Canadians were denied entry into the Canadian military because of the color of their skin. They refused to take no for an answer, and in 1916, volunteers all, they were allowed to serve as part of a segregated, non-combatant unit in France. Their determination to serve their country despite the biases that they had faced is something we should never forget.
Thankfully, the soldiers of No. 2 Construction Battalion are finally receiving the recognition they were due over 100 years ago. Their story is one of tremendous courage and valor in the face of hate and discrimination. It is an example of the resilience, selflessness, and dedication of those who have fought for our country. And it is a reminder that we still have work to do to fight against racism and injustice here at home.
We must also remember our veterans who served in the Second World War. Soldiers like Warrant Officer 2nd Class John Robert Osborne, who led his company to recapture Mount Butler during the defense of Hong Kong in 1941. They charged with their bayonets and they seized the summits from the Japanese forces. But by mid-afternoon, they were surrounded and running low on ammunition and supplies. As bullets and grenades rained down on them, John Osborne courageously picked up many of the live Japanese grenades and threw them back at the enemy. But there was one he could not get to in time. He yelled for his platoon to clear the area, pushed his men aside, and threw himself on the explosive. He was killed instantly. His courage saved many lives, and he was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for his valor.
10 years later, and a few thousand kilometers away, roughly 700 Canadians would help defend a force of 5,000 Chinese soldiers at Kapyong during the Korean War. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. They fought valiantly, and they persevered. While the Battle of Kapyong was on land, Canadians in Korea also served in the air and on the seas. In the skies, they destroyed enemy jet fighters and transported people and much-needed cargo.
And on the water, sailors like Ted Jamieson, an Indigenous Canadian Armed Forces member from the Six Nations Upper Cayuga Band, helped patrol the coasts, disrupt enemy supplies, and conduct a surveillance. Chief Petty Officer First Class Jamieson was an expert in anti-submarine warfare and deployed to Korea on HMCS Iroquois. He was on board Iroquois when the ship was attacked on October 2nd, 1952, an attack that led to the Royal Canadian Navy's only battle casualties during the Korean conflict. He survived and came home to share his vast knowledge with others as a senior instructor at the artillery school in Halifax.
Shortly after the Korean War, the United Nations launched its first large-scale peacekeeping effort in response to the Suez Crisis. In November of 1956, Canadian forces joined 9 other countries in the Middle East as part of the first United Nations emergency force. Their efforts helped end the crisis and brought peace to the region for the next 10 years. The early 90s, Canadian Armed Forces returned to the Middle East, serving in the Gulf War. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the end of that conflict.
More than 4,000 Canadians served in the Persian Gulf region from 1990 to 1991, including Major Lynn Doucette, an air weapons controller from Ingonish Beach, Nova Scotia. She deployed to the Persian Gulf in 1991 and was posted to an American air base in Turkey. There, she commanded a U.S. airborne warning and control system aircraft. She kept a careful eye on the enemy and reported what she saw on the radar to the generals on the ground. She recommended what actions they should take, but she faced significant barriers as a woman in uniform. Local cultural restrictions at the Turkish airbase banned women from entering the operation centers. She was denied her seat at the table due to her gender, but she was undeterred and continued to perform her duty with excellence and bravery. Her work and that of her comrades in arms was the key to maintaining control over the sky during the Persian Gulf War.
We've answered the call time and time again. Following the attacks on September 11, 2001, we began our combat operations in Afghanistan. Over 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces members fought bravely to help the people of that country in their time of need. Besides the dangers of combat, the conditions were harrowing and left lasting scars on many who served. They faced extreme heat, dust storms, and the constant threat of roadside bombs or other explosive device.
158 Canadian military members made the ultimate sacrifice, including Captain Nicola Goddard. She was a strong leader and a respected officer who believed in building a better world for others. And she remains an inspiration to those who serve today.
Today, I and other people like me carry on the legacy of those who came before us, working on the ground, in the air, and at sea. Our operations across the globe are all about supporting our allies and partners. And here at home, when disaster strikes, we're always ready to help Canadians in need. No matter what, we find a way to help. We adapt, we learn, and we take on new roles. Because at the end of the day, that's why we joined the Canadian Armed Forces, to defend Canada and Canadians, to do good in the world, to live a life of purpose and meaning.
So whenever you can, I encourage you to reflect on the efforts of our Canadian Armed Forces members, both past and present. Celebrate the lives of those who made it home, who survived to have families and to grow old. Honor those who did not. And remember that today, there are thousands of members who put their lives on the line in defense of our country, our people, and our values. Lest we forget. Thank you. The last post has become associated with war remembrance and military funerals. This dates back to the mid-19th century when it was played at the graves of soldiers who had died in conflicts abroad. The idea being that the call of the end of day also signifies the end of life. For Remembrance Day ceremonies, the last post and reveille, also known as rouse, is used to draw the symbolic association between the soldier's last duty of sitting sentry, death, and his rising above his mortal duties, reveille. The last note of the last post marks the start of 2 minutes of silence. Please stand for the last post, silence, and rouse.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be in Canada, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless you, Canada.
The poppy. I am not a badge of honor. I am not a racist smear. I am not a fashion statement to be worn but once a year. I am not glorification of conflict or of war. I am not a paper ornament, a token. I am more. I am a living memory of a father or a son, of a mother or a daughter, a permanent reminder of each and every one. I am paper or enamel. I am old or shiny new. I am a way of saying thank you to every one of you. I am a simple poppy, a reminder to you all that courage, faith, and honor will stand where heroes fall. We began our program with O Canada, the national anthem of Canada. And in long-standing tradition, we will end our Remembrance Day program with God Save the Queen, our royal anthem. Please stand for the royal anthem of Canada.
They were summoned from the hillside, they were called in from the glen, and the country found them ready at the stirring call for men. Let no tears add to their hardship as the soldiers pass along.